The Wyoming sun bled crimson across Cinder Bluff's main street as dust devils spun between raw timber buildings that still smelled of pine sap and desperation. The summer of 1876 had brought more than railroad track, and Union Pacific promises it had brought a reckoning. Men lined the boardwalks with Colt Navy revolvers on their hips and hunger in their eyes. Railroad workers with sledgehammer shoulders stood beside gamblers in tobacco-stained waistcoats, and miners still gray with rock dust from test shafts in the Badlands. On a weathered shipping crate in the center of that dusty avenue stood a woman who looked like death's pale sister. Her chemise, once white cotton, now hung torn and rust-brown across shoulders that shook with exhaustion. Dark hair fell in damp tangles around a face the color of tallow candles. In her arms, she clutched a newborn skin, still Vernick's slick mouth, wide in a thin wail that cut through the murmur like a knife. Blood soaked the hem of her shift and dripped slowly onto the warped planks beneath her bare feet, leaving dark coins in the dust. Foreman Murdoch stood beside the crate, thick as a bull and twice as mean. His company ledger flapped in the evening breeze as he raised his voice above the infant's cries. Gentlemen of Cinder Bluff, we run an efficient operation here. No freeloaders, no dead weight. This woman's got 2 hands and a strong back once she heals proper. The child, plenty of establishments need a healthy babe. Start the bidding at $5. Laughter rippled through the assembly. A few men called out crude suggestions. The woman on the crate swayed, knees buckling, and pulled the baby tighter against her chest. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching, pleading, and found only calculation. Then the crowd shifted. A man emerged from the shadow of the feed store, moving with the deliberate calm of someone who understood violence intimately. He was Lakota, evident from the copper of his sun-darkened skin and the long black hair tied back with rawhide strips. He wore no war bonnet, only a simple tunic with faded beadwork geometric patterns in blue and white and buckskin leggings that had seen hard miles. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against weathered skin. His eyes were black and steady, and they never left the woman on the crate. He walked to the center of the circle, each step measured, and knelt in the dirt. From a leather pouch at his belt, he poured a stream of silver dollars. They clinked and rolled, catching the dying light. Then he added the pouch itself, heavy with gold dust. The coins lay in the dust like an accusation. Not to own, he said, his voice low and clear. To release. The laughter died. Silence fell like a physical weight. Hands drifted toward holsters. Murdoch's face darkened. You got nerve walking into white business, redskin. The Lakota man rose slowly. She is not property to sell. The child is not yours to auction. I pay what you demand. They walk free. On the ridge above camp, 3 mounted figures sat, motionless, feathers and rifle barrels silhouetted against the bruised sky. Watching. Waiting. Murdoch glanced at the ridge, then at the crowd. His hand hovered near his revolver. The tension stretched thin as wire. And then the woman on the crate did something that made every soul in that street go still. She looked down at the Lakota warrior through the chaos and the shouting, and her breathing, rapid and shallow with fear, began to slow. Her chest rose and fell in time with his. For 1 breath. 2. 3. Their eyes locked, his unreadable as carved stone, hers wide with exhaustion and something like recognition. The world held its breath with them. Then a voice shouted, "Let him buy her if he wants trouble." And the spell broke. Murdoch spat and scooped up the coins. Fine. But if I see either of them on Union Pacific land again, they answer to my Winchester. The Lakota man stepped to the crate and extended his hand. The woman stared at it, calloused, scarred, steady, and then placed her fingers in his palm. He helped her down with impossible gentleness. The baby wailed, and he withdrew a dented tin canteen, offering it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and for a moment his gaze held hers with an intensity that felt like a promise. Then he looked away first, granting her dignity. The crowd parted reluctantly. The Lakota man led her toward the edge of camp, and the newborn pressed against her chest. Behind them, Murdoch watched with narrowed eyes, already calculating. On the ridge, the three riders turned their horses and vanished into the gathering dark. 3 days earlier, a woman named Celia Harrow had arrived in Cinder Bluff on a freight wagon, heavily pregnant and traveling alone. She was 25 years old, with dark hair pinned up in a style that spoke of cities and gray eyes that held the wary intelligence of someone who had learned not to trust easily. She had been a telegraph operator in St. Louis for Western Union, 18 words per minute on Morse code, which was remarkable for anyone and extraordinary for a woman. But she had made a fatal mistake in a world run by men. She had refused to forge message timestamps for a broker named Thomas Calloway, who was running a scheme with delayed market reports. When she said no, Calloway accused her of stealing $300 from the office cash box. He had friends in the city police. She had a roll of punched telegraph tape proving the actual transmission times did not match Calloway's ledger. But no one would listen to a woman's word over a man with money. So she ran west on the cheapest ticket the Union Pacific sold until the money ran out and the baby came early. She had been in the storage shed behind the company store when the flash flood hit. Rattler Creek, dry for months, turned into a roaring torrent in minutes. Celia felt the first contraction as rain hammered the tin roof. She cried out, but no one heard over the storm. Except Peg-Leg Dan. The old whiskey peddler, half-blind and missing his left leg below the knee, heard her scream through a gap in the boards and came hobbling through ankle-deep water. He boiled water on a makeshift stove, tore strips from a flour sack, and talked to her in a low, steady voice throughout the long night. "Breathe, girl. Count with me. 4 counts in hold for 4 counts out. You're doing fine. That's it. You're stronger than you know." She was not doing fine. There was too much blood, and the baby seemed lodged sideways. But Dan's voice kept her anchored to consciousness. When the baby finally slipped into his gnarled hands, a tiny, squalling girl with dark hair plastered to her skull, he wrapped her in his own threadbare coat and placed her on Celia's chest. "There now," he whispered, his rheumy eyes bright with tears. "You got yourself a fighter." Then he sat down hard against the wall, pressed his hand to his chest, and died with a small smile on his weathered face. Dr. Lyle Bennett found them at dawn, Celia barely conscious, the baby wailing weakly, and Peg-Leg Dan cold and stiff. Bennett was 40 years old with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering on the frontier. He had been a battlefield surgeon during the war, and his hands still shook sometimes when he worked. But they were steady as he examined Celia's injuries. "You've torn badly," he said quietly, his voice careful and clinical to spare her embarrassment. "I can stitch the worst of it, but you need rest. Real rest, not just a night's sleep." For 3 days, Murdoch kept her confined to a corner of the supply shed. He claimed she needed medical supervision, but Bennett saw the truth. Murdoch was waiting for her to recover enough strength to be valuable. A woman alone with a newborn had limited options on the frontier, and Murdoch knew how to exploit desperation. On the 3rd night, Bennett examined the wound on her inner thigh, where she had torn during delivery. The stitches were holding, but infection was a constant risk. "You need at least another week of rest before you should be walking any distance." "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford, doctor." Her voice was hoarse from screaming during labor. "What is Murdoch planning?" Bennett looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "He will find a way to make you profitable. There are establishments in the mining camps that take healthy infants. Pay good money for them. And brothels always need wet nurses. Celia's arms tightened protectively around her daughter. I will not allow that. Then you need to leave Cinder Bluff. And go where I have no money, no family, no strength to walk. He knows I am trapped. Bennett had no answer to give her. He left medicine for the pain and a clean cloth for the baby, then walked out into the night, feeling like a coward. In the freight car at the camp's edge that served as a schoolhouse, Miss Ada Finch sat grading slates by lamplight. She was 30 years old, plain-faced and sharp-eyed, with brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older and sterner than she felt inside. She had come west from Boston to teach because the pay was better and because she had a soft spot for lost souls. She had been sold once too married at 18 to a man her father chose, a shopkeeper who seemed respectable in public but turned vicious when drunk. For 3 years she endured his fists and his contempt. Then he died in a bar fight over a card game, and she took his savings and left without looking back. She had rebuilt herself as a teacher, found purpose in shaping young minds, and she recognized the look of a trapped woman when she saw one. When she heard about the auction from one of her students, a rail worker's son who told the story with disturbing enthusiasm, she felt old familiar anger rise in her chest like bile. She walked to Bennett's tent and pushed through the canvas flap without knocking. I heard what Murdoch is planning. Bennett looked up from his medical journal, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. And it is unlawful. Indenture contracts were outlawed in this territory 3 years ago. What he is proposing is slavery with extra steps. The law is 300 miles away in Cheyenne, Miss Finch. Out here, Murdoch's ledger is the only law that matters. The railroad gives him authority over labor contracts, and no one will challenge it. Then we bear witness. We document what happens, and we make sure someone in Cheyenne hears about it. Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have more courage than sense, Miss Finch. I will take that as a compliment, Doctor. Outside camp near the horse corral, a man named Jory Pike watched the sunset and tried not to think about his dead wife. He was 30 years old with broad shoulders and a homesteader's calloused hands. He had a claim 10 miles south, 160 acres of stubborn prairie he was trying to coax into wheat. His wife Mary had died that spring during childbirth, screaming for hours while he held her hand and prayed to a God he no longer believed in. The baby died too, a tiny boy who never drew breath. Pike had buried them both in the small plot behind the cabin and had not spoken Mary's name aloud since. He came to town for supplies once a month and tried to avoid people. But when he saw the crowd gathering in the street the next evening, curiosity drew him closer. When he realized what was happening, when he saw the woman on the crate with a newborn in her arms, something cracked open inside his chest. Part of him wanted to bid, not for labor or profit, but because he understood loss. Because his cabin was too quiet and his hands needed work that mattered. Because maybe helping someone else survive would make his own survival feel less pointless. But in the end, he did nothing. Just stood there gripping the corral fence hard enough to leave splinters in his palms, watching as the Lakota man stepped forward and paid. Pike did not know the man's name, but he recognized the look of someone cast out from their own people. He saw it in his mirror every morning, the eyes of a man living in a world that no longer made sense. Night fell fast in Wyoming, and cold came with it. The Lakota man, his name was Nayati, which meant wrestler in his tongue, led Celia to an abandoned tack shed a quarter-mile from camp. Inside, the air smelled of old leather and mouse droppings. He built a small fire in a circle of stones, the flames casting dancing shadows on the rough plank walls. He handed her his canteen. Drink, all of it. She drank the water cool and slightly metallic. When she finished, he took the canteen and refilled it from a larger container he had hidden in the corner. There is more if you need it. Water is the first thing. Everything else comes after. Why did you do that? Celia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Spend your money on someone you do not know. Nayati fed small sticks to the fire, his movements careful and precise. For a long moment he did not answer. Then, my sister was sold to fur traders when she was 12 years old. I was 10, not old enough to stop it, not strong enough to fight. I have carried that failure for 18 years. Today I was strong enough. Today I could stop it. The money you paid, that was a fortune. Silver and gold. Where? It came from a payroll wagon that washed out in the flood 2 days ago. I found it caught in rocks downstream, the strongbox broken open by the current. I kept it because men like Murdoch shoot Lakota on sight and ask questions never. If I had tried to return it, I would be dead or in chains. And you used it to buy my freedom. His eyes met hers across the fire. To release you. You are not owned. You are not property. You are a person who needed help, and I had the means to give it. Celia looked down at her daughter, who had finally stopped crying and lay sleeping against her chest. I do not even know how to thank you. Then do not try. Just survive. That is thanks enough. He tore a strip of cloth from the hem of his tunic and wet it with water from the canteen, precious water that should have been for drinking. Your leg is still bleeding. Let me see the wound. She hesitated, years of modesty warring with practical need. Then she pulled up the torn hem of her chemise, exposing the ragged tear on her inner thigh, where Dr. Bennett's stitches strained against inflamed tissue. Nayati's expression did not change, but his hands were impossibly gentle as he cleaned the wound with the damp cloth. This will hurt. She nodded, biting her lip against the pain as he worked. When he finished, he wrapped the cloth around her thigh and tied it with a strip of rawhide from his belt. We leave at dawn, he said quietly. The railroad men will come searching for their payroll. And there are others. My cousin Huck Sheila leads a war party in these hills. He believes I betrayed our people by living near white settlements instead of fighting. If he finds us, he will kill you and the child to make a point. Celia felt ice in her stomach. So we are hunted by both sides. Yes. She looked at her sleeping daughter and felt something harden inside her chest. Then we run, and we survive. Nayati studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. Rest while you can. You will need all your strength tomorrow. She lay down on the scattered straw, the baby nestled against her chest. Nayati took up position by the door's Spencer rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the threshold. The last thing Celia saw before exhaustion pulled her under was his silhouette against the stars, still patient, watchful. When she woke in the deepest part of night, disoriented and afraid the fire had burned to coals and the baby was making small, hungry sounds. Nayati was beside her, instantly moving with practiced silence. He draped his wool blanket over her shoulders, leaving himself with nothing, and took the baby gently in his scarred hands. The infant quieted at his touch, her tiny fist wrapping around his finger. He rocked her with unconscious skill, humming something low and rhythmic. You have done this before, Celia observed softly. My sister had a son before the traders took her. I cared for him for 3 years while she worked in their camp. They let me visit because I was useful. I could track and hunt. The boy's name was Chasky. It means firstborn son. His voice was flat, carefully empty of emotion. When my sister tried to escape, they killed her and sold the boy to a family going east. I do not know where. It has been many years. I am so sorry. Sorrow changes nothing, but action might. That is why I paid for your freedom. They sat in silence, the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. Then Celia asked, "Why were you in Cinderbluff? It seems dangerous for you." "I was tracking the payroll wagon. I needed to know if the washout was a raid or an accident. If it was a raid, the army would blame my people and use it as excuse for reprisal. If it was an accident," he shrugged. "The truth rarely matters, but sometimes it is worth knowing anyway." "And what did you discover?" "It was an accident. The wagon tried to cross Rattler Creek at dusk, just as the storm hit. The driver misjudged the water depth. Both men drowned. Their bodies are still in the creek, tangled in the harness. But no one will believe a Lakota who says he found government money and kept it for good reason." Celia looked at him. This man who had sacrificed a fortune to help a stranger, who held her daughter with tenderness, born of old grief, who faced danger from all sides, without complaint. "We are both exiles then, both accused falsely, both running from different kinds of injustice." "Yes," Nayati said simply. "That is why I understood what I saw in your eyes on that crate. I have seen that same look in every mirror and still water I pass." At dawn, Nayati shook her awake gently. "We must go now." They stepped out into gray morning light. In the distance, cavalry riders moved along the camp perimeter, searching. "They are looking for the payroll," Nayati said quietly. "They will find this place soon." They set off across the open prairie, moving as quickly as Celia's injured leg allowed. The grass was waist-high and still wet with dew. Wind cut through her thin chemise, despite Nayati's wool shirt layered over it, which smelled of smoke and leather and him. Behind them, hoofbeats grew louder. "They have spotted us," Nayati said, his voice calm but urgent. "We need cover. There, that dry creek bed." They ran. Celia's legs screamed with every step, fresh blood soaking through the bandage. The baby wailed, sensing her mother's fear. A rifle shot cracked across the morning. The bullet kicked up dirt 20 yards to their left. "Down!" Nayati pulled her into the shallow creek bed, the depression barely 3 feet deep. He levered around into his Spencer and took position at the rim. "Stay low. Do not raise your head." 4 cavalry riders appeared over the rise, blue coats, bright against the pale grass, Springfield carbines gleaming. The corporal in front raised his hand, halting the group just out of effective rifle range. "They are not rushing," Celia whispered, trying to calm the screaming baby. "They are waiting for reinforcements. When more arrive, they will surround us." Nayati fired a shot that kicked dirt in front of the lead horse, making it rear. The riders pulled back slightly. "That bought us 5 minutes, maybe less." "What do we do?" "When I fire next, you run for those rocks to the north. 100 yards. Can you make it?" Celia looked at the distance, at her bleeding leg, at her screaming daughter. "I have no choice." "Then we go on 3. 1, 2, 3. She ran. Her leg buckled on the second step, but she caught herself and kept moving. Behind her, Nayati fired twice more measured shots, meant to suppress, not kill. A bullet whined past her head so close she felt the displacement of air. They reached the rocks as the riders crested the creek bed. Nayati was bleeding from a shallow graze across his left cheek, but his hands were steady as he reloaded. "Are you hit?" Celia asked, breathless. "No. Are you?" "No." Ahead, beyond a wide buffalo wallow filled with thick mud, rose a line of low hills with better cover caves and rock formations that could be defended. But the wallow stretched 50 yards, and the mud looked deep enough to trap them. "We will never make it across," Nayati said, reading her thoughts. Staying here will kill us just as surely. He looked at her, really looked, seeing the determination beneath the fear, and nodded slowly. Then we try. Stay close. Step exactly where I step. They moved toward the wallow. Nayati tested the edge with his foot, then committed his weight. The mud sucked at his leg, pulling him down to mid-calf. He took another careful step, feeling for solid ground beneath the muck. Halfway across, Celia's injured leg gave out. She fell forward with a cry. The baby clutched desperately against her chest as they plunged into the cold mud. It filled her mouth and nose, thick and suffocating. Strong hands caught her arms, hauling her upright. Nayati's face was inches from hers, intense with focus. I have you. Breathe. Look at me. Breathe with me. She gasped, spitting mud, trying to control her panic. Her chest heaved erratically. Breathe. He repeated, his voice low and steady. He took a deep breath, slow and measured. With me. In. Hold. Out. She focused on his eyes, his breathing, the solid strength of his hands on her arms. Slowly, her breathing synchronized with his. In. Hold. Out. The panic receded. Good. Now step here. Feel where the ground is solid. That is it. Another step. One agonizing step at a time, they made it across. On the far side, Nayati examined her thigh wound in the shadow of an overhanging rock. It had torn open completely, blood running freely now. This needs to be cauterized, or infection will kill you within days. How? He pulled a battered iron spoon from his pack and built a tiny fire with dead grass and buffalo chips. He held the spoon in the flames until it glowed dull red. No, Celia whispered, understanding. No, please. If you do not, you will die slowly and in far greater pain. And your daughter dies with you because I cannot care for an infant alone out here. His voice was gentle but implacable. I am sorry. There is no other way. She looked at him and knew he was right. She looked at her sleeping daughter and knew she would endure anything to protect her. Do it. Just do it quickly. He handed her his leather belt, still warm from his body. Bite down. It will help. She placed it between her teeth, tasting salt and leather. Nayati positioned the glowing spoon carefully. On 3, 1. He pressed the hot metal against her torn flesh. On 1. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, white hot and all-consuming, as if her entire body was being consumed by fire. Her scream was muffled by the belt, her body arching involuntarily. But Nayati's hand was firm on her shoulder, holding her steady, keeping her from moving away from the burning. It lasted only seconds, but felt like hours. When he finally pulled the spoon away, she collapsed against the rock, sobbing with pain and shock. It is done. The worst is over. He wrapped the wound with clean cloth torn from his tunic, his touch as gentle as his voice. You were very brave. Many men would not have endured that without passing out. I do not feel brave. I feel like dying. Brave is not absence of fear. Brave is moving forward despite it. He offered her water. Drink. Then we need to keep moving. Those riders will circle around. That evening, they reached an abandoned placer mine at the base of a sandstone ridge. Nayati tested the timber supports carefully before leading her inside. The mine was shallow, barely 30 feet deep, but it was shelter from the wind and hidden from casual observation. He built a small fire near the entrance, where the smoke would dissipate quickly, then set a dented pot with water and jerky to make thin broth. Eat. You need strength for milk production. Celia drank the broth slowly, letting the warmth spread through her body. How long can we stay here? Not long. A day, maybe 2. The cavalry will search these hills systematically, and Hakshila's warriors use these old mines as waypoints. We are not safe anywhere, but some places are less dangerous than others. Tell me about Hakshila. Why does he hate you? Nayati was quiet for a long moment, feeding small sticks to the fire. He is my cousin, my mother's sister's son. We were raised together, hunted together, trained together. After Little Bighorn last month, many young warriors wanted to continue fighting. Hakshila was one of them. But I saw what was coming: more soldiers, more reprisals, more death. I argued for finding a different path. Not surrender, but strategic survival. Hakshila called me a coward and a traitor. He said I had been corrupted by living too close to white settlements. When the elders banished me for speaking against continued raids, Hakshila led the vote. He has been hunting me since. So you lost your family because you wanted to save them. Yes, that is the way of such things. Celia looked at this man who had lost so much, who faced death from all directions, who still helped a stranger with gentleness and patience. When this is over, if we survive, what will you do? I do not think that far ahead anymore. Survival is enough. But if you could choose, if the world were different. He looked at her across the fire, and for the first time she saw something other than careful neutrality in his expression. I would find a place where my nephew's children could grow up safely, where being Lakota is not a death sentence and helping others is not considered weakness. I would build something small and good in the ruins they are making of this land. That is a beautiful dream. It is only a dream. Reality is more practical. They took turns keeping watch that night. Just before dawn, during Celia's shift, she heard the scrape of boots on stone outside. She touched Nayati's shoulder, and he was instantly awake, rifle in hand. Hakshila's men, he whispered after listening for a moment. 3 of them. They are checking the mine. Can we slip past them? Not with the baby. She will cry and give us away. We fight. He positioned himself at the mine entrance, using the timber support as partial cover. Celia took the Spencer with shaking hands, remembering his brief lesson from the day before. Check the magazine. Lever around. Aim low. Squeeze, do not pull. The voices outside grew closer, speaking in Lakota. Nayati called out something in the same language, a warning or challenge. One of the men laughed, and the response was mocking. The first warrior appeared in the entrance, backlit by dawn. Nayati swung the shovel he had found in the mine, catching the man's wrist with a crack of breaking bone. The rifle clattered to the ground. The second man fired blindly into the darkness. The bullet ricocheted off stone, whining past Celia's head. She raised the Spencer sighted as Nayati had taught her and fired. The shot went wide, but close enough to make the warrior dive for cover. The third man rushed in with a knife drawn. Nayati blocked the slash with a shovel handle, then drove the wooden stock of the rifle into the attacker's face. Blood sprayed. The man went down, and Nayati swept his legs, dropping him hard. He pinned him with the shovel blade pressed against his throat, not quite breaking skin. Go, Nayati said in English for Celia's benefit. Tell Hakshila I will not run forever, but I will not die easily either. The warriors scrambled away, dragging their injured companion. But as they retreated, a fourth figure appeared on the ridge above, tall, lean, hard-muscled, with 3 eagle feathers in his hair and a Winchester rifle in his hands. Hakshila looked down at Nayati with an expression of contempt and something that might have been old grief. He spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Nayati replied, his tone even and firm. Hakshila spat on the ground, then turned and walked away without another word. His warriors followed. When they were gone, Celia lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. What did he say? He said I had chosen whites over my people. And when we meet again, I should not expect mercy. I told him I chose to help someone who needed help. And if that makes me a traitor, then I will be a traitor who can still look at himself in water's reflection. And what did he say to that? Nothing. He has no answer for it. That is what makes him angriest. Celia sank down against the mine wall reaction setting in. I missed. I aimed at him and I missed completely. Nayati took the Spencer gently from her hands. You stood and fired while someone was shooting at you. Many trained soldiers freeze their first time under fire. You did not freeze. That is enough for today. Back in Cinder Bluff the morning after the auction, Lieutenant Marcus Gresham stood in the dusty street with his back rigid and his uniform immaculate despite the frontier conditions. He was mid-30s, narrow-shouldered with cold blue eyes and a thin mustache waxed to sharp points. Everything about him spoke of a man who valued appearance and order above all else. He tacked a poster to the wall of the company store with precise, measured hammer blows, wanted for theft of U.S. Army payroll. Nayati Lakota Scout, $500 reward. Shoot on sight, authorized by order of Fort Laramie Commander Bennett pushed through the gathering crowd, his medical bag still in hand, from treating a rail worker's crushed finger. Lieutenant, you are accusing this man based on what evidence? Gresham turned with a pleasant blank expression that never reached his eyes. The payroll wagon washed out in the flood 3 nights ago. 2 soldiers drowned. Yesterday, a Lakota man pays with silver dollars and gold dust at a public auction. Where do you suppose he obtained such wealth, Doctor? Perhaps he found it in the creek after the flood. Salvaging lost property is not the same as theft. In military law, failing to report and return government property is functionally equivalent to theft. This gives us clear authority under the Fort Laramie Treaty to pursue hostile elements in the territory. Gresham's smile was thin and satisfied. It also provides legal justification to clear these hills of Huck-Sheila's war party once and for all. Bennett felt cold understanding settle in his stomach. This is not about the payroll at all. You are using it as pretext for military action. I am following proper procedure, Doctor. If you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you present it to the post commander at Fort Laramie. That is 300 miles away. I expect the matter will be resolved long before any inquiry could be conducted. Bennett pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, a payroll voucher he had found among Peg-Leg Dan's belongings when preparing the body for burial. This is a receipt for the wagon passing through the rail depot at Bitter Creek Station. The timestamp says 10 o'clock on the evening of the storm, confirmed by the station master's signature. The flood hit Rattler Creek shortly after midnight. If Nayati found the payroll in the wreckage after dawn the next morning, he is not a thief. He is a man who found lost property and used it for a good purpose. Gresham glanced at the voucher with supreme indifference. A piece of paper proves nothing, Doctor. It could be forged. It could be read incorrectly. It could be for a different wagon entirely. In any case, the decision has been made. The pursuit is authorized. If you interfere with military operations, you will be subject to federal charges. Good day. He turned and walked away, his boots leaving sharp prints in the dust. Bennett stood holding the voucher, fury and helplessness warring in his chest. Then he walked with deliberate purpose to the freight car that served as Miss Finch's classroom. She was cleaning slates when he entered, but one look at his face made her set them aside. What happened? Gresham is framing Nayati for stealing the payroll. I believe he and Murdoch staged the entire thing, hid the money themselves, and are using the theft as legal justification for clearing the hills of Lakota warriors. If they succeed, both Nayati and that woman will be killed, and no one will ask questions. Finch took the voucher and studied it carefully, her teacher's mind noting every detail. This is solid evidence. But Gresham is right about one thing. Paper alone will not stop him. We need more. We need proof of the actual payroll's location. How do we get that? We search Murdoch's office. That is illegal. So is human trafficking and framing innocent people for capital crimes. Finch's voice was sharp as broken glass. I did not come west to watch injustice happen simply because it wears an officer's uniform. Will you help me or not? Bennett looked at her prim proper Miss Finch from Boston, who was proposing to commit breaking and entering, and felt something like admiration. Yes, I will help. That afternoon, Finch walked to Murdoch's office carrying a wicker basket. She knocked politely and entered at his gruff summons. Mr. Murdoch, I need school supplies, paper ink, slate pencils. The children are running short. Murdoch sat behind his desk, like a feudal lord, ledgers stacked around him. He scowled but jerked his thumb toward the back of the room. Supply shelves are in the back. Take what you need. And do not be greedy. The company does not run a charity. Of course not, thank you. While she moved toward the shelves, her eyes cataloged everything: the layout of the room, the position of furniture, potential hiding places. Near the pot-bellied stove, the floorboards looked uneven, as if they had been pried up and replaced. A heavy wooden chest sat atop them, positioned deliberately. She deliberately knocked over a stack of slates, sending them clattering across the floor. Blast it, woman. Be more careful. I am so sorry, Mr. Murdoch. She crouched to gather the fallen slates, using the movement to shift closer to the chest. In the gap between chest and floor, she caught a glimpse of leather, the corner of a satchel, military issue by the look of it, hidden under floorboards that had definitely been disturbed. She collected her supplies with appropriate flustered apologies and left. That evening, she found Bennett in his medical tent. The payroll is in Murdoch's office, hidden under loose floorboards beneath a chest near the stove. I saw the satchel. Then we have proof. But how do we get it to Nayati to clear his name, Jory Pike? The homesteader, he barely speaks to anyone. He was at the auction. He saw what happened. And more importantly, he knows this land better than any of us. If anyone can find Nayati in the Badlands, it is Pike. They found Pike at the livery stable loading supplies onto his mule for the ride back to his claim. Finch approached him directly. Mr. Pike, I need your help. I do not get involved in other people's troubles, Miss Finch. Then think of it as your own trouble. That woman and her baby are being hunted by men who are lying about a payroll theft to justify killing them. If you do nothing, they die. Just like your Mary died while people stood by and did nothing to help. Pike's hands clenched on the supply sack, his knuckles going white. His jaw worked, and for a moment Finch thought he might hit her. Then his shoulders slumped. That was a cruel thing to say. Yes, I am not proud of it. But I am desperate, and you are the only person who can reach them in time. Pike was silent for a long moment. Then, what do you want? She handed him the payroll voucher and a hastily drawn map showing the location of the satchel in Murdoch's office. Deliver these to Nayati. Tell him the truth, that we have proof he is being framed. Tell him to stay hidden while we work to clear his name officially. Pike stared at the papers, his hands shaking slightly. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. If I get shot doing this, I am blaming you in whatever comes after. That seems fair. He rode out that night under a half-moon, following game trails into the Badlands. But he was not as alone as he thought. One of Hakshila's outriders spotted him and followed at a distance, curious about a lone white man riding into dangerous territory. When Pike stopped to rest his mule at a creek crossing, the outrider made his move thinking to take Pike's supplies and horse. But Pike had learned caution the hard way. He heard the footsteps and rolled off his mount just as the warrior rushed from cover. They collided hard, tumbling down the creek bank in a tangle of limbs. The outrider was younger and faster, but Pike had the desperate strength of a man with nothing left to lose. They struggled in the shallow water, each trying for advantage. The warrior drew a knife. Pike caught his wrist, and they strained against each other, muscles shaking with effort. Something in Pike's left shoulder gave way, with a pop and a flare of white-hot pain, dislocated or broken, he could not tell. But he did not let go. Could not let go. He drove his knee into the warrior's ribs with savage force, heard something crack, and used the moment of shocked pain to tear the knife free. He did not use it to kill. Instead, he threw it into the creek and grabbed the papers from his saddlebag with his good hand. Then he ran, cradling his injured arm, leaving the warrior gasping in the water behind him. He found Nayati and Celia at the old placer mine just after dawn, looking like death themselves, exhausted, injured, hunted. Nayati emerged from the mine entrance with his rifle raised, but lowered it when he recognized Pike. "Easy," Pike gasped, swaying on his feet. "Miss Finch sent me, with proof." He fumbled the papers out with his good hand, the other hanging uselessly. "Gresham and Murdoch staged the theft. They are framing you. This voucher proves the timeline does not match their story. And this shows where they hid the actual payroll in Murdoch's office under the floorboards." Nayati took the documents and read them quickly, his expression hardening. "Why would you risk this?" Pike looked at him with eyes that had seen too much loss. "Because I let my wife die and did nothing, just sat there holding her hand while she screamed and bled and begged me to save her. I could not save her. But maybe I can help save someone else's family. Maybe that counts for something." "It counts for a great deal, Jory Pike." Nayati gripped his good shoulder briefly. "Thank you. Pay me back by surviving, and by getting that baby somewhere safe." Pike swayed again, and Celia caught his elbow. "Your shoulder needs setting. Let me look at it." "No time. There is a storm coming. I felt it in the air last night. Be careful. Flash floods in these hills kill more people than bullets." He climbed back on his mule and rode away, before they could argue, leaving Nayati and Celia staring at the proof of their innocence, and knowing it might not matter at all. By midday, the storm Pike had predicted began gathering in earnest. Dark clouds piled up like mountains on the western horizon, their undersides green-black with hail. Wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain and ozone and electricity. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. Nayati studied the sky with a practiced eye of someone who had lived his entire life reading weather. This will be bad. Not just rain, flash floods, lightning, possibly tornadoes. We need to move to higher ground. Should we stay in the mine, it would shelter us from the wind. If it floods, we drown. If the entrance collapses in a lightning strike, we are buried alive. And if Gresham's men find us trapped inside, we have no escape." He pointed to a rocky outcrop half a mile north, where a lone cottonwood tree clung to the hillside. "From there we can see anyone approaching from 3 directions. And there is a rock overhang that will give us some shelter." They began climbing. Celia's legs shook with exhaustion and blood loss, each step a conscious effort of will. The baby, sensing her mother's distress, began to cry thin, desperate wails that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Halfway up, Celia had to stop, leaning heavily on a boulder. Her vision swam with gray spots, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. "Rest," Nayati said, though his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. We do not have time. Pushing until you collapse helps no one. If you fall unconscious, I cannot carry both you and the baby to safety. Rest for 2 minutes. Drink water. Catch your breath. He offered his canteen, and their fingers brushed as she took it. She felt the roughness of old calluses, the warmth of his skin, the steadiness that seemed to radiate from him like heat from stone. Nayati? She began, not sure what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. I trust you was obvious. You have given me hope, felt too vulnerable to speak aloud. He looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. She saw in his eyes that he knew what she could not say. And she saw something else too, and the same fragile hope she felt, carefully guarded, but real. We should keep moving, he said quietly. The storm will not wait. They reached the cottonwood just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Nayati positioned them on the lee side of the rock outcrop, where the overhang provided partial shelter. From here they had a clear view of the mine below and the approaches from 3 directions. If Gresham's men come, we will see them in time to prepare. If I fall, you keep shooting until the Spencer is empty, then you run north toward those hills. There are Lakota camps in that direction. Hakshila may hate me, but he will not kill a woman, an infant, in cold blood. I am not leaving you. You have to. For her. He looked at the baby, who had finally quieted. She needs her mother alive more than she needs me. You are more than just. Celia's voice was fierce despite her exhaustion. You are more than just the man who bought my freedom. You are. He reached out and touched her cheek gently with the backs of his fingers, silencing her. I know. But we do not speak of such things yet. Not until we survive this. Words like that are for after, when we have earned the right to a future. Then the storm hit with savage fury. Rain came in horizontal sheets driven by wind that howled like a living thing. Lightning split the sky close enough that the thunder was instantaneous, deafening cracks that shook the ground beneath them. The temperature plummeted, and within minutes Celia was shivering violently, despite Nayati's blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Through the curtains of rain, they saw movement below, men on horseback, emerging from the gray like ghosts. Gresham's posse, a dozen riders with rifles and torches that guttered in the downpour. One man carried a wooden crate, carefully dynamite, stenciled on the side in black letters. They are going to blow the mine, Nayati said quietly. They think we are still inside. From the north, more riders appeared, Hakshila's warriors, moving to intercept the cavalry, or perhaps simply taking advantage of the chaos. The 2 groups had not yet seen each other through the storm. We are surrounded, Celia whispered. Not yet. They both think we are in the mine. Nayati explained his plan quickly. He would circle around and rig the mine entrance to collapse on its own, making it look like a natural cave-in. Meanwhile, Celia would stay at the cottonwood with the rifle ready to provide covering fire if needed. That is insanely dangerous. Do you have a better idea? She did not. Then be careful, please. He pressed his forehead to hers briefly, and they breathed together, 1 breath, 2, 3, synchronizing their rhythms as they had on the auction crate. Then he was gone, moving through the storm like smoke. Celia positioned herself behind the largest boulder, the Spencer rifle resting on the rock for stability. The baby was secured in a sling tied to the cottonwood trunk, protected but leaving Celia's hands free. Please, little one, she whispered. Please stay quiet just a little longer. Below, Gresham's posse reached the mine entrance. 2 soldiers dismounted and carried the dynamite crate inside their torches, casting dancing shadows. The others waited, rifles ready, forming a perimeter. Seconds later, there was a deep rumble, and the mine entrance collapsed in a billowing cloud of dust and smoke. One soldier stumbled out bleeding from his ears and nose. The other did not emerge. Gresham swore viciously audible even through the storm. He collapsed it from inside. He anticipated us, searched the area. He cannot have gone far. That was when Hakshila's warriors opened fire from the north ridge. The first shot took one of Gresham's men in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The posse scattered, returning fire blindly into the rain. The battle dissolved into chaos, men shouting, horses screaming, muzzle flashes bright in the gray storm. Nayati was halfway back to the cottonwood when a bullet whined past his head, close enough to draw blood from his ear. Celia raised the Spencer and fired, not aiming at anyone specifically, but adding to the confusion. Her shot kicked up mud near a soldier's feet, making him dive for cover. Nayati reached her position, breathing hard. Phase 1 complete. What is Phase 2? Survive Phase 1. Then they heard a new sound, a low, ominous roar that grew rapidly louder. Flash flood. Celia breathed understanding and terror combining. Water surged down the ravine from the west, a brown wall 6 feet high, carrying uprooted trees and boulders in its churning mass. It swept through the combat zone like the hand of an angry god. Men scrambled for higher ground, abandoning their fight in favor of simple survival. One soldier was too slow and vanished under the water with a single truncated scream. "We have to move," Nayati said urgently. "The water is rising faster than normal. There must be a natural dam upstream that just broke. This entire area will be underwater in minutes. How do we cross it?" "There." He pointed to a rope he had strung across a narrow point in the ravine earlier when he had rigged the mine. It was above the current water level, but the flood was rising fast. "We go now, or we do not go at all. You go first. I will hold the rope steady from this side." "Celia, you go first, or we both die arguing." No time for debate. Nayati wrapped the rope around his waist in a hasty harness, handed Celia the rifle, and stepped out onto the rope. The current immediately tried to pull him under. He went down to his waist, then his chest, pulling hand over hand against the savage force of the water. Celia braced against the boulder, holding the rope with all her strength. Her injured leg screamed, but she did not let go. Could not let go. Midway across, the rope began to fray, where it rubbed against a sharp rock. Celia saw the fibers separating strand by strand. "Nayati, the rope is breaking." He moved faster, pulling with desperate strength. The rope, stretched, thinned, began to part completely and snapped. Nayati fell into the torrent and was swept downstream, arms flailing for purchase on nothing. Celia did not think, did not hesitate. She tied the baby sling securely to the cottonwood trunk with every knot she knew, then dove into the water after him. The cold was shocking, driving the air from her lungs. The current was impossibly strong, tumbling her like a leaf. She could not tell up from down. Her lungs burned. She was going to die here, and her daughter would die alone, tied to a tree. Her hand hit something solid, an arm. She grabbed with desperate strength, and another hand caught hers in return. Their fingers locked together with the fierce grip of people who refused to let go. The current slammed them into a half-submerged log. The impact knocked the remaining air from Celia's lungs, but also gave them purchase. Nayati pulled them both onto the log, gasping and choking. Then Dr. Bennett was there, wading into the shallows downstream, grabbing Nayati's belt with both hands and hauling with all his strength. He pulled them onto the muddy bank where they collapsed, coughing water. "Can you move?" Bennett asked urgently, checking them both for injuries. "The baby?" Celia gasped. "The cottonwood." I see her. She's safe. The tree is on high ground. The water will not reach it. Bennett helped Nayati to his feet. We need to get to camp. The marshals are coming. Miss Finch telegraphed the territorial office 2 days ago. But Gresham knows he is cornered, which makes him more dangerous, not less. We need to move now. They reached Cinder Bluff as the storm began to ease. The rain lessening to a steady drizzle. The camp looked devastated, tents, collapsed equipment, scattered mud everywhere. But people were emerging from shelter, taking stock, beginning the work of recovery. In the center of the main street stood Lieutenant Gresham, soaked and filthy, but defiant. Murdoch was with him, rifle in hand, looking like a cornered rat. When Gresham saw Nayati and Celia approaching, supported by Bennett, fury twisted his refined features into something ugly. They survived how? He rounded on Murdoch. You said the mine would collapse completely. You said there was no way out. There wasn't. He must have. I do not care. Gresham drew his service revolver with shaking hands. They die now. We say the flood killed them. No one will question it. But Ada Finch stepped out of the schoolhouse, ringing the brass bell with steady, measured strikes. People gathered despite the rain, rail workers, miners, families drawn by the sound and by curiosity. Finch held up the payroll voucher and Celia's roll of telegraph tape, protecting them from the rain under her shawl. These prove Lieutenant Gresham and Foreman Murdoch staged the payroll theft. The timestamps show the wagon passed through Bitter Creek Station at 10 o'clock. The flood hit after midnight. The evidence was deliberately hidden to frame an innocent man. Dr. Bennett stepped forward. I can testify that Lieutenant Gresham ordered dynamite used against an unarmed woman and newborn infant. That is attempted murder, regardless of any other charges. Gresham laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria in it. Proof testimony. I am an officer of the United States Army, acting under proper authority. Who do you think any court will believe, a respected officer or a drunk doctor, a spinster schoolteacher, and a savage? You will believe me. Jory Pike pushed through the crowd, his left arm in a crude sling, his face gray with pain, but his eyes clear and hard as flint. He held up a water-stained letter, the ink smeared, but still legible. I took this from one of Hakshela's warriors during our fight. It is written in trade Lakota, the simplified version used for negotiations between tribes and whites. It is from Lieutenant Gresham to Hakshela, dated 3 weeks ago. It promises information about railroad supply movements and payroll schedules if Hakshela's warriors will maintain pressure on Union Pacific operations. Murmurs ran through the crowd, growing louder. Pike continued his voice, carrying across the street. Gresham was playing both sides, taking Army pay, while feeding intelligence to Lakota raiders. He wanted the conflict to continue because it justified his position and gave him opportunities for profit. When the payroll wagon washed out accidentally, he saw a chance to blame it on Nayati and use it as pretext for military operations he had wanted to launch anyway. Gresham's face went pale, then flushed dark red. That is a forgery, a transparent fabrication. Then explain the payroll in Murdoch's office, Finch said coldly. Under the chest by the stove, hidden beneath pried-up floorboards. I saw it myself 3 days ago. If the money was stolen by Lakota raiders, why is it still here in camp? The crowd's murmur became angry rumbling. Men who had risked their lives searching for the stolen payroll felt the sting of manipulation. Others simply recognized injustice when they saw it. Murdoch's hand tightened on his rifle. You have no right to search private property. That is illegal. Not anymore, said a new voice. Hakshela stepped from the shadows, at the edge of the crowd, flanked by 6 warriors. He moved with lethal grace, stopping 20 feet from Gresham. When he spoke, it was in halting but clear English, learned from traders. This man sent me words. Said railroad was weak. Told when money wagons travel. Gave maps of supply camps. Huck-Sheila's expression was stone, but his voice carried contempt. I thought he was fool white man. Now I see he used my people. Made us tools for his profit and power. Nayati stepped forward and translated Huck-Sheila's next words, which came in rapid Lakota. Huck-Sheila says his uncle, a scout named Thashunke Witko, which means Crazy Horse, was executed by soldiers 3 years ago for providing false intelligence that led to an ambush. The army said he deliberately misled them. But now Huck-Sheila wonders if that was a lie too. If officers like Gresham blamed scouts for their own failures and greed. Gresham's hand dropped to his revolver. I do not have to listen to this from the people you betrayed, from the men you manipulated into fighting your war for profit. Bennett's voice was cold as winter iron. Yes, Lieutenant. You do? But what happened next was not what anyone expected. Instead of surrendering or arguing further, Gresham's expression shifted calculation, replacing fury, desperation, overriding military discipline. In one fluid motion, he lunged not at the armed men surrounding him, but at Celia. His arm wrapped around her throat from behind, revolver pressed to her temple. The baby, still in her arms, screamed. Nobody moves. Gresham's voice cracked with strain. I walk out of here with the woman and child as insurance. Anyone follows anyone tries to stop me, I put a bullet through her head. The crowd froze. Nayati raised his rifle, but Gresham pulled Celia tighter, using her body as a shield. Drop it, savage. Drop it now, or I drop her. Nayati's jaw clenched, every muscle in his body, taut with restraint. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the Spencer to the ground. Good. Everyone else guns down. Now. Pike dropped his revolver. Bennett raised his empty hands. Even Huck-Sheila's warriors lowered their weapons, slightly unwilling to risk the woman's life. Gresham began backing toward the edge of camp, dragging Celia with him. The baby wailed in terror. Celia's eyes were wide with fear, but her mind was racing, calculating angles and possibilities. The hat pin. The simple steel hat pin she had used to secure her hair for the journey west, now tucked into the collar of Nayati's shirt she still wore. 7 inches of tempered steel. Gresham's attention was divided, watching Nayati, watching the crowd, calculating his escape route. His grip on her throat was tight, but his stance was slightly off balance, favoring his right leg to compensate for pulling her weight. You should have stayed dead in that mine. Gresham hissed in her ear, his breath hot and sour. Would have been cleaner for everyone. No witnesses, no evidence, no complications. Cleaner. Celia's voice was barely a whisper, but steady. Nothing about you is clean, Lieutenant. You are soaked in lies and blood and corruption. She shifted the baby slightly with her left arm, freeing her right hand. Her fingers found the hat pin. Shut up. You are just... Celia drove the hat pin backward into Gresham's inner thigh, with all the strength she possessed, aiming for the femoral artery the way she had seen Dr. Bennett mark on his anatomy charts. Gresham screamed, his grip loosening reflexively. Celia twisted away, curling her body around the baby to protect her. Gresham's revolver came up, tracking toward her. Nayati was already moving. He covered the distance in 3 long strides and tackled Gresham with the full force of his body, driving him backward into the mud. They rolled, fighting for control of the gun. Gresham was heavier leverage working in his favor. He got his thumb under Nayati's chin, forcing his head back, revolver slowly coming around toward Nayati's face. Celia saw it happening. She scooped up the Spencer from where Nayati had dropped it, levered around with shaking hands, and fired. The bullet took Gresham in the right shoulder, spinning him partially around. He cried out, and Nayati wrenched the revolver from his weakened grip. But Gresham was not finished. With his left hand, he pulled a knife from his boot, a surprise weapon blade dark with old blood. He slashed wildly. Nayati barely avoided it, but the tip opened a cut across his ribs, blood blooming through his tunic. They grappled in the churning mud, both bleeding, both exhausted, both fighting with the desperate strength of men who knew only one would walk away. Gresham got on top knife, raised in both hands, for a killing downward thrust. "You cost me everything you read." Nayati caught his wrists, but Gresham had gravity and weight on his side. The knife descended slowly, inexorably point, aimed at Nayati's throat. Nayati's arms shook with effort, muscles standing out like cables, but he was losing. The knife came closer, closer. And then Murdoch made his final mistake. While everyone watched the life-or-death struggle, Murdoch saw his chance. He lunged for the baby, thinking to grab her as his own hostage, his own insurance for escape. "The child is worth something I can still salvage." He never finished. Celia, still holding the Spencer, swung the rifle like a club. The hardwood stock caught Murdoch across the temple with a sickening crack of breaking bone. He staggered sideways, his eyes rolling back. Jory Pike was there instantly, despite his broken shoulder, moving with the single-minded purpose of a man settling accounts. He grabbed Murdoch by the collar with his good hand and dragged him to the water trough. "This is for Mary. This is for every woman you sold. This is for being the kind of man who makes the world worse just by existing in it." He pushed Murdoch's head under the water and held it there. Murdoch thrashed weakly hands, scrabbling at Pike's arm. Pike's face was set like stone, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his grip never faltered. Murdoch's struggles grew weaker. Stopped. In the street, Nayati's strength was failing. The knife was inches from his throat now. Gresham's face twisted with hate and triumph, and the certain knowledge that he was damned, but would take his enemy with him. "Die, you savage. Die knowing you failed." Ada Finch had been moving through the chaos with methodical purpose. She picked up a rock from the ground, heavy, angular, the size of both fists together, and brought it down on the back of Gresham's skull with every ounce of strength in her schoolteacher's arms. The sound was wet and final. Gresham's eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways off Nayati, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. Nayati rolled away, gasping, blood running freely from the cut across his ribs. Celia was there instantly, dropping beside him, her hands fluttering over his injuries. "Are you how bad?" "I am alive." He caught her hands, stilling them. "I am alive because of you." He looked past her to Finch, who stood frozen with the bloody rock still in her hands, staring at what she had done. "Thank you, Miss Finch." Finch dropped the rock as if it had burned her. Her hands were shaking violently. "I have had quite enough of men like him. Quite enough of standing by while evil people do evil things because it is safer than acting. Quite enough." Bennett knelt beside Gresham's crumpled form, checking for pulse and breathing. The lieutenant was still alive, but barely. The shoulder wound was serious, and the head injury had cracked his skull. Blood leaked from his ear. "He is gut shot and skull cracked," Bennett said clinically. "He has maybe an hour conscious if I treat him. Maybe 2 or 3 total. The head injury is severe. Even if he survives, he may never wake up." Gresham's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. He looked at Bennett, then at Nayati, then at Celia holding her baby. Hatred and fear and bitter understanding warred on his face. Bennett pulled out a small notebook and pencil. "Write the truth, a full confession, and I will give you morphine for the pain. Die with a clear conscience, if nothing else. Or refuse and die hard over the next few hours. Your choice, Lieutenant." Gresham's hand shook as he took the pencil. He could barely hold it, but he began to write in jagged, deteriorating script. He confessed to hiding the payroll with Murdoch, to planning to split the money and blame the theft on Lakota raiders, to manipulating Hawk Sheila with false information to maintain profitable conflict, to attempting to murder witnesses to cover his crimes. But there was more. As he wrote another truth, emerged one he had buried for years. During the campaigns after Little Bighorn the previous summer, Gresham had commanded a unit that was ambushed in a canyon. Half his men died in the first volley. The disaster should have ended his career, would have ended it if the truth came out that he had ignored his Lakota scouts' warnings about the terrain because he thought he knew better. Instead, he had blamed the scouts themselves, accused them of deliberately providing false intelligence, had 3 of them imprisoned and one, Hawk Sheila's uncle, executed as a traitor. You executed an innocent man to save your career, Nayati said quietly, reading over Bennett's shoulder. His voice was flat, but his hands were clenched into fists. Gresham coughed and blood flecked his lips. He was just a savage. You are all just obstacles. His eyes drifted closed. Bennett administered morphine and Gresham's labored breathing eased slightly. But he did not wake again. He died 20 minutes later as the rain finally stopped and pale sunlight broke through the clouds. Hawk Sheila, who had been standing silently at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. He looked at the confession, though he could not read the English words. Nayati translated quietly into Lakota. Hawk Sheila's expression did not change, but his voice when he spoke was cold as winter wind. This man had my uncle killed. We were told it was justice that the Shunke Witko had betrayed our alliance. It was murder for white man's ambition. He looked at Gresham's body, then at Nayati. Something passed between them, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. A crack in the wall of anger and betrayal that had separated them. You were right to refuse the raids, cousin. I was wrong to call you traitor. This war is not what I thought it was. It has been twisted by liars for profit. We must be more careful, must think more deeply about who benefits when we fight. Nayati met his cousin's eyes. The injustices are real. The theft of land, the broken treaties, the murders, all real. But men like Gresham use our justified anger as a tool. They profit from chaos while we pay the price in blood. Hawk Sheila nodded slowly. I will tell the elders. There must be a reckoning within our own councils as well. We must root out those who manipulate us, as this man did. He looked at his warriors. We go. This is white man's justice now. But the memory of this betrayal stays. We do not forget. They mounted and rode north toward the Black Hills, disappearing into the afternoon sun. The territorial marshals arrived 2 hours later, 3 hard-faced men with federal badges and the authority to impose actual law. Senior Marshal Holloway was 50 with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen every variation of human evil. He read Gresham's confession, thoroughly examined the recovered payroll satchel, studied the voucher and telegraph tape. He shook his head slowly. Ugliest mess I have seen in 20 years of law enforcement. The Army will want to bury this bad for morale, bad for recruitment, bad for their budget requests. But I will make sure the truth gets on the official record. Nayati, you are cleared of all charges. There will be a letter of commendation from the territorial governor. He turned to Celia. Mrs. Harrow, we received a telegram from St. Louis yesterday. The telegraph company arrested Thomas Calloway on fraud charges. Turns out your tape was not the only evidence. 2 other operators came forward after you left, and an auditor found discrepancies in his accounts going back 3 years. Calloway is awaiting trial. Your job is waiting if you want it, with an official apology and a 20% raise. He handed her an envelope with a Western Union seal. Celia stared at it, her old life offered back with interest. She thought about St. Louis, the crowded boarding house, the clatter of telegraph keys, the careful navigation of male colleagues who resented her competence. Clean, safe, predictable. She thought about the last week terror and pain and exhaustion. Yes, but also courage she did not know she possessed. Kindness from strangers. The fierce protection of community. And Nayati, steady, honorable Nayati, who had risked everything for nothing more than seeing someone who needed help. She tore the letter in half. I do not owe St. Louis anything. I owe the people who pulled me from a river and stood up to corrupt men with guns. This is where I stay. Nayati's shoulders relaxed, tension draining from his body. He shifted his blanket slightly, making room, a small gesture of invitation. Celia sat beside him, and he wrapped it around both their shoulders. The baby, finally blessedly sleeping, clutched the wooden bird Nayati had carved and made a sound almost like contentment. Marshall Holloway produced another document, an official guardianship writ with territorial seals. This declares the auction null and void under the 1873 anti-indenture statute. Celia Harrow is declared sole legal guardian of her daughter. No person or entity may claim ownership or indenture rights. Anyone attempting to do so will face federal charges. Celia took the paper with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you. Holloway's expression softened slightly. We may be slow sometimes, ma'am, but we get there eventually. He tipped his hat. You folks take care of each other. The frontier is hard enough without people making it worse. That evening, as the camp settled into the work of recovery and repair, Celia and Nayati sat outside Bennett's medical tent while he stitched the cut on Nayati's ribs. The baby slept in a proper cradle Ida Finch had donated, wrapped in clean blankets. Celia watched Nayati's face as Bennett worked the tightness around his eyes that betrayed pain. He would not voice the careful breathing that kept him still while the needle pierced his skin. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, immediately holding tight. Almost done, Bennett murmured. You are lucky another inch to the right, and he would have cut into your lung. As it is, you will have an impressive scar, but no permanent damage. I am collecting scars, Nayati said. Soon, I will have a full set. At least this one has a good story, Celia said. Better than I tripped over a rock. He smiled a real smile, rare and transformative. That was only once, and the rock was hidden in tall grass. You tripped over a rock. Bennett's eyebrows rose. The great tracker and warrior defeated by geology. It was a very deceptive rock. They laughed, the sound surprising and sweet after so much fear and violence. It felt like releasing pressure from a valve, tension finally easing. When Bennett finished and left them alone, Celia and Nayati sat in comfortable silence, hands still linked. The setting sun painted the broken clouds in shades of orange and gold, and the air smelled of rain-washed earth. What happens now? Celia asked quietly. Now we decide what comes next. You have your freedom. I have my name cleared. We have survived. The question is, what do we want to build from here? I do not want to go back to who I was before. That woman was smaller somehow, more afraid. Fear is not weakness. But yes, I understand. I am not who I was either. He looked at her, his expression serious. There is a question I need to ask. Not today, you are too tired, and we have both seen too much death. But soon, when we have both had time to think clearly. What question? The kind that requires a clear answer. The kind that changes everything. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tighten. But not today. Today we rest and heal. Celia pressed her forehead to his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and smoke and him. Then ask me tomorrow, because I think I already know my answer. In the weeks that followed, Cinder Bluff settled into new rhythms. A fair foreman named Jackson arrived from Cheyenne to replace Murdoch with strict instructions to run operations honestly. The camp became less battlefield, and more community people looked out for each other, helped rebuild created structure beyond simple survival. Bennett treated Nayati's injuries and Celia's lingering wounds from childbirth. The infection threat passed. Strength returned slowly but steadily. During those long days of recovery, Celia often helped Bennett in his medical tent, learning wound care and basic treatment. She discovered she had a gift for the work's steady hands and a calm manner that put patients at ease. "You would make a good nurse," Bennett observed one afternoon as she changed bandages on a rail worker's burned hand. "Better than good, you have instinct for it. That cannot be taught." I like the problem-solving aspect. It reminds me of telegraph work. You have to read the signals, interpret the patterns, respond appropriately. If you are serious, I can teach you properly. The territory desperately needs trained medical personnel. She considered it. Let me think on it. I need to decide what kind of life I am building first. Hakshila and his warriors withdrew to the Black Hills after the confrontation with Gresham. But the encounter had shifted something fundamental. The elders, upon learning of Gresham's betrayal and manipulation, held council for 3 days. They stripped 2 feathers from Hakshila's war bonnet as penance for trusting a white officer's lies, without sufficient verification, a significant public censure. Hakshila was reassigned from war party leader to guardian of the river, crossing humble but necessary work, protecting families during seasonal migrations. It was a demotion, but also an opportunity for reflection and rebuilding trust. 6 weeks after the storm, Nayati rode out to the crossing to speak with his cousin. They sat on opposite sides of a small fire, not quite at peace, but no longer enemies. "You chose them over us," Hakshila said without preamble. "I chose to help someone who needed help," Nayati replied steadily. "If you found a Lakota woman being sold in a white town, would you not do everything in your power to free her?" Hakshila was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps, yes, I would." "Then you understand. She needed help. I could give it. The fact that she is white changes nothing about the moral calculation. The elders say I was foolish to trust Gresham's words without proof. They say young warriors are too quick to fight and too slow to think." Hakshila poked at the fire. "They may be right. Anger is easy. Wisdom is harder. Anger has its place, but it is a poor guide for long-term strategy." They did not embrace when they parted. But when Hakshila gripped Nayati's forearm briefly, the warrior's acknowledgement of respect, it felt like a beginning. Not reconciliation exactly, but perhaps the foundation for eventual healing. Jory Pike recovered from his dislocated shoulder, though it left him with permanent, limited range of motion. He could no longer swing an axe or lift heavy loads overhead, which made farming alone nearly impossible. But he found new purpose as a guide, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to help newcomers navigate safely. He still visited Mary's grave regularly, talking to her about his days. But now he also had living people to talk to: Miss Finch, Dr. Bennett, Nayati, and Celia. The loneliness became bearable, softened by community. One evening, he brought Celia a gift, a rocking chair he had built from scrap lumber, sanded smooth and finished with linseed oil. "For the baby, and for you when she needs rocking," Celia ran her hand over the smooth wood, tears pricking her eyes. Jory, this is beautiful. You did not have to. I know. I wanted to. Mary would have liked you. She would have been glad I helped. It was the first time he had spoken her name aloud in months. The saying of it seemed to ease something in his chest, like lancing an old wound to let it finally drain and heal. Ada Finch continued teaching, but she also became an informal advocate for justice issues. When a Chinese rail worker was beaten by his foreman, Finch documented the incident and personally telegraphed the territorial governor. When a pregnant woman was denied medical care because she could not pay, Finch organized a collection and shamed Bennett into treating her anyway. You are making enemies, Bennett warned her. I have been making enemies my entire life simply by being a woman with opinions. At least now I am making them for good reasons. She never married again. Her classroom and her students became her family, and she was content with that. 3 months after the auction, Miss Finch appeared at the boarding house where Celia was renting a room with the baby. She carried a folder of documents and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. I have a proposal, she announced without preamble. The camp has collected donations, small amounts from workers, plus a substantial contribution from Mr. Pike, who sold some land. Together, it is enough to purchase 40 acres near Sweetwater Creek. Flood-damaged land the railroad does not want, but it will be fertile once the silt settles. Good soil water access, grazing potential. She spread a hand-drawn map on the table. It is yours if you want it. A place to build something permanent. The deed would be in your name alone, legally protected. No one can take it from you. Celia stared at the map, emotions overwhelming her. Why would everyone do this? Because you matter. Because what happened to you was wrong, and this is a small way to make it right. Because community means taking care of each other. Finch's voice softened. Because you remind us that we can choose to be better than the worst things that happen to us. So what do you say? Celia looked at the map, then at her sleeping daughter, then out the window, where Nayati was repairing a wagon wheel with patient skill. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. That evening, she and Nayati walked to the land together. It was late afternoon, the light golden and warm. They stood at the highest point of the 40 acres, looking over gently rolling prairie. Sweetwater Creek ran along the southern boundary, clear and steady even in late summer. Cottonwoods grew along the banks, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The soil was dark and rich, and the grass grew thick. We could build here, Celia said softly, hardly daring to voice the dream. A cabin, a barn, plant crops, raise livestock, make a real life, together. Nayati looked at her, and she saw the question he had promised to ask reflected in his eyes. Together. You are certain my people will see you as a traitor for marrying a white woman. The whites will never fully accept you for marrying a Lakota man. Your daughter will be caught between worlds belonging fully to neither. This is not an easy path. Nothing about the last months has been easy, and we survived it. We will survive this too. And our daughter will not be caught between worlds, she will be a bridge between them. She will show that it is possible to be both, to honor both heritages. Celia took his hands. I am certain. Are you? I have been certain since the moment you looked at me from that auction crate and breathed with me. I just needed to know you felt the same. Then ask me properly. He knelt in the prairie grass, still holding her hands. Celia Harrow, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me? Will you be my wife and partner and the person I face every sunrise with? Yes. To all of it, yes. They married quietly a week later, in a ceremony that blended traditions from both their worlds. Darsader Bennett officiated, having been granted authority by the territorial court. Ada Finch stood witness, wearing her best dress. Jory Pike brought wildflowers from the prairie, and Hochschiele came standing at the back of the small gathering, not yet ready to fully reconcile, but willing to acknowledge his cousin's choice. Celia wore a simple dress. Miss Finch had helped her sew from cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar. Nayati wore his best tunic, cleaned and repaired with new beadwork that Hochschiele's wife had made geometric patterns in blue and white and red, a quiet gesture of peace and acceptance from family. They spoke vows with hands clasped, promising partnership and respect and shared struggle. Bennett's words were simple. Marriage is not about ownership. It is about choosing every day to walk beside someone through whatever comes. Do you both choose this? I do, Celia said. I do, Nayati said. Then by the authority granted me by the Wyoming Territory, I declare you married. Build a good life. You have both earned it. Nayati gave Celia a necklace he had made from silver coins braided onto leather cord, a transformation of the money that had bought her freedom into a symbol of mutual choice. This is not a chain. It is a promise that I see you as my equal. What we build together. Your voice matters as much as mine. Celia gave him a pocket watch she had bought with her first wages from helping Dr. Bennett. So, you always know what time it is and never have to rely on false records or other people's lies. Time is yours now. We make our own schedule. They spent their wedding night in the small cabin Jory Pike and several rail workers had helped them build 4 solid walls of roof that did not leak a stone fireplace and real glass windows Miss Finch had ordered from Cheyenne. It was not large or fancy, but it was theirs. Built with their own hands and the help of friends. Owned, not rented. A foundation for the future. They spent the winter making the cabin into a home. Nayati built furniture from scrap lumber, a table, chairs, shelves, a proper bed frame. Celia sewed curtains and planted a small winter garden of root vegetables. They dug a well and struck water at 20 feet, which felt like a miracle. The baby, whom they named Ada Rose, honoring both Miss Finch and Celia's grandmother, grew rapidly, transitioning from newborn fragility to sturdy infant vigor. She learned to sit up, then crawl with determined enthusiasm across the cabin floor. She was fearless, curious, stubborn, reaching for everything with chubby hands and examining the world with serious gray eyes like her mother's. She looked at Nayati with absolute trust, calling him Papa, before almost any other word. He carved toys for her animals and birds smooth and perfectly weighted for small hands. He sang to her in Lakota, teaching her the rhythms of his language, even though she could not yet speak. In late December, Dermap, Bennett visited with an official offer. The Territorial Medical Board approved funding for a clinic in Bluff Creek. They offered me the position of resident physician with authorization to hire a nurse. The pay is modest, but steady $30 a month. I hoped you would consider it, Celia. 3 days a week, you would still have time for the farm. Celia looked at Nayati, a question in her eyes. They had developed a way of communicating without words, a shorthand of glances and small gestures born from shared survival. He nodded slightly. You should do it. You have the skill and the calling. And the money would help us buy breeding stock next spring. Besides, I cannot have you getting bored and deciding I am not interesting enough to keep around. She laughed and threw a dish towel at him. No danger of that, I promise. She took the position. 3 days a week, she worked at the clinic, treating injuries, assisting with births, teaching basic hygiene and disease prevention. The work was challenging and satisfying, engaging the problem-solving skills she had honed as a telegraph operator. She was good at it, and she knew it. The other 4 days, she worked the farm with Nayati. They cleared fields, mended fences, planted the kitchen garden that would feed them through the summer. The work was hard, but they did it together, falling into natural rhythms of cooperation. In the evenings, after Ada Rose slept, they sat by the fire and talked. Really talked about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Nayati told stories of his childhood, the hunts and ceremonies, the slow erosion of traditional ways. Celia described St. Louis, the telegraph office, the careful navigation of being a woman in a male profession. "Do you miss it?" Nayati asked. "The city, the work." "Sometimes I miss the intellectual challenge, but not the rest. Not the constant vigilance, not the knowledge that one mistake could destroy everything. Here I can breathe. I can build something that matters." "You could still work with telegraphs if you wanted. The railroad is expanding. They need operators." "Maybe someday. Right now this is enough. More than enough." They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies with patience and tenderness. There was passion, yes, but also a deep well of affection and trust that made every touch meaningful. They communicated in the language of skin and breath, finding ways to please each other that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with presence. Afterward, lying tangled together under quilts, Celia traced the scar on Nayati's ribs, the mark of Gresham's knife. "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes in cold weather. But it reminds me I survived. We survived. We did more than survive. We built something real. Yes, we did." Spring came slowly then, all at once. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush and lupine evening primrose and prairie smoke. Sweetwater Creek ran full with snowmelt. Birds returned in massive flocks, their songs filling the dawn. Nayati and Pike cleared and planted 10 acres of winter wheat, gambling on Wyoming's unpredictable weather. It was a risk, but calculated. If the crop succeeded, they would have enough to sell at market and buy proper livestock. Celia expanded her kitchen garden, planting vegetables and herbs. She also started a small medicinal garden with plants Dr. Bennett recommended: feverfew, yarrow, chamomile, comfrey. Useful things that could help neighbors as well as family. Ada Rose took her first steps in May, lurching across the cabin floor with her arms outstretched for balance. Both Celia and Nayati were there to see it, and they cheered so enthusiastically that she immediately sat down hard in surprise, then laughed her burbling baby laugh. "She will be running by summer," Nayati predicted. "And climbing everything by fall," Celia added. "We are going to have our hands full." "Good. I prefer challenges." In June, a formal letter arrived from the Bureau of Indian Affairs addressed to Nayati. Due to his exemplary service in preventing violence between settler and tribal populations and his courage in exposing corruption within military ranks, he was being appointed as official liaison between Lakota tribes and the territorial government. The position came with a small salary, $20 a month, and authorization to travel for negotiations. They are using fancy words to say I can be useful while being carefully supervised, Nayati said, reading by lamplight. But it is something, a way forward that does not require choosing one world completely over the other. Will you take it? He looked at Celia and Ada Rose, his family chosen and real. Yes, because it might help others who are caught between worlds like our daughter will be. She deserves a world where she can be both things at once, Lakota and white traditional and modern. This work might help build that world, even if I only do it one small negotiation at a time. In July, the wheat crop came in thick and golden, far exceeding their hopes. They harvested with help from Pike and several rail workers working from dawn to dusk in the summer heat. The grain was good, No rust, no blight-firm kernels that would fetch decent prices. They sold most of the harvest to the railroad commissary, keeping enough for seed and household use. The profit was modest, but real enough to buy 2 milk cows, a bull calf, and 6 hens. Enough to plan for next year's expansion. That evening, exhausted and satisfied, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Ada Rose played at their feet with her carved animals, conducting elaborate games in toddler gibberish that mixed English and Lakota. "We did it," Celia said softly. "We actually built something. We did. And we will keep building. Every day, every season, for as long as we have strength." She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, listening to the prairie wind, feeling the satisfaction of work well done, and a future that held promise instead of threat. Part 9. The Gathering. On a warm evening in late August, 2 years to the day after Celia had stood on that auction crate, they held a gathering at the farm. The table they had built together was crowded with people. Dr. Bennett, Ada Finch, Jory Pike Jackson, the foreman, several rail workers who had become friends, and Hawk Sheila with his wife and young son. It was not a large gathering, but it felt significant. A chosen family bound not by blood, but by shared struggle and mutual respect. They ate simply but well-roasted chicken from their own flock, vegetables from Celia's garden, bread Finch had baked, wild plum preserves Pike had made. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people who knew each other well. After the meal, as the sun began its long descent toward the horizon, they walked together to the cottonwood tree Celia had planted the previous autumn. It had survived the winter and was now 10 feet tall, its branches spreading roots, digging deep into the rich soil. Beneath the tree, Celia had placed a simple stone marker. She had carved the words herself during winter evenings, working slowly and carefully to get them right. Freedom is not given. It is earned. Community is not found. It is built. Love is not demanded. It is chosen. "It is a good marker," Nayati said, reading it for perhaps the 100th time. "It is the truth we lived," Celia replied. "I wanted Ada Rose to know that story when she is old enough to understand. I want her to know where she came from, not the geography, but the values, the choices we made and why." Bennett touched the stone gently. "It is a truth worth remembering, worth passing on." They stood as stars began to appear, 6 adults and 2 children, people who had survived violence and corruption and harsh frontier realities. They had lost much: homes, loved ones, innocence, old certainties. But they had gained something precious, the knowledge that even in the darkest times, even when the world seemed bent on destroying everything good, it was possible to build something worth having. A family, a community, a future. Ada Rose, now a sturdy toddler, stood between Nayati and Celia, holding both their hands. She looked up at the darkening sky with wonder, then pointed at the first star. "Light," she announced proudly. "Yes, little one," Nayati said softly. "Light. Even in darkness there is light." The prairie wind whispered through the cottonwood's leaves, carrying the scent of growing wheat and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called that wild, lonely sound that was the voice of the frontier itself. August 1878. The farm had grown in the years since the gathering. The cabin had been expanded with a second room for Ada Rose, now nearly 2 years old, and talking in complex sentences that mixed English and Lakota with cheerful randomness. The barn Pike had helped build housed 4 cows, 2 horses, the bull, and a growing flock of chickens. 20 acres were under cultivation now, with plans to clear more next spring. Celia worked 3 days a week at the clinic, which had expanded to serve not just the railroad camp, but surrounding homesteads. She had become indispensable to Dr. Bennett, who had begun teaching her more advanced procedures. "You have better hands than most doctors I trained with," he told her. "Steadier, more intuitive. You should consider formal medical school. There are 3 that accept women now." "Maybe someday," she said. "Right now I am needed here. But someday, perhaps." Nayati's work as liaison had taken him to Fort Laramie twice and to Lakota camps in the Black Hills 3 times. The work was difficult, navigating between worlds that did not trust each other, translating not just languages, but entire worldviews. But it was important work, and he was good at it. Slowly, incrementally, he was helping build bridges where before there had been only chasms. His relationship with Hakshila had shifted into something like friendship again. Not the easy brotherhood of their youth that was gone, burned away by betrayal and banishment. But they had found a new footing: mutual respect, shared purpose, cautious affection. Hakshila's son and Ada Rose played together during visits, oblivious to the complexities of race and culture that divided the adult world. Jory Pike had purchased the 40 acres adjacent to their farm and was building his own cabin. "Not for wheat," he explained. "For horses. There is good money in breeding stock, and I have a gift for it." He was still quiet, still visited Mary's grave regularly, but he smiled more now. The worst of the grief had passed, leaving behind bittersweet memory instead of raw agony. Ada Finch had been elected to the Bluff Creek School Board, the first woman in Wyoming Territory to hold such position. She immediately instituted policies requiring equal education for boys and girls, regardless of race or economic status. Some complained loudly. Most adapted. The children themselves did not care, they just wanted to learn. On the evening of the 2nd anniversary, they gathered again at the cottonwood. The tree was now 15 feet tall, thriving in the good soil. The carved stone beneath it had weathered slightly, but the words remained clear. They ate and talked and laughed as the sun set. Ada Rose demonstrated her newest skill, counting to 10, in both English and Lakota, and received enthusiastic applause. Hakshila's son showed off his first carved horse, which Nayati had helped him make. As darkness fell and stars emerged, Bennett raised his cup of cider. A toast to survival, to justice, to the radical act of building something good in a world that often seems determined to destroy goodness. To family, Finch added, the kind we choose. To second chances, Pike said quietly, and the courage to take them. To bridges, Nayati said, looking at his cousin. Between worlds, between peoples, between past and future. To home, Celia said simply, and to the people who helped us build it. They drank together, their voices mingling with the wind and the distant coyote song and the rustle of cottonwood leaves. Ada Rose fell asleep in Nayati's arms, her wooden bird clutched tight, her breathing deep and peaceful. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But here, in this small corner of Wyoming Territory, on a farm built by determination and community, 6 people, soon to be 7. As Celia's hand rested protectively on her belly, where new life had just begun, had carved out something miraculous. Not perfection, not paradise. Just a place where justice sometimes won, where kindness mattered, where people of goodwill could build lives worth living despite everything arrayed against them. A place where freedom was earned, community was built, and love was chosen. A place called home. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.